Okay, good evening, everybody. Not yet. Welcome to the Council Business Planning Committee, the Committee of the Whole. And this evening, of course, we are dealing with the 2017 operating budget. This will be our, I guess, third discussion on the budget based on the previous meetings. Well, no, we talked about it briefly at the Capital meeting. You weren't there, John. So, this evening we have regrets from Councillor McMillan, who's away. Outside of that, all members of Council are here, and pretty much all senior members of staff. And Joe Nicholson, our CEO of the library, is here as well. Are there any declarations of interest before we begin? Your coffee. Seeing none. Oh. And we think the coffee just came in. Confirmation of agenda. Mr. Kakopoulos, any changes on the agenda at all?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, there are none.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to begin with reports under 5A, and that's the 2017 operating budget. So we will turn it over to Mr. Kakopoulos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give Council a brief overview of what we'll be discussing this evening, I will try again to go through this presentation as quickly as possible in terms of the recap, and then spend a little bit more time going over the operating budget by department. We've also got in front of you FTE business cases, and as per Council direction, taking you through various tax levy scenarios. So just to provide you a little bit of historical information, over the last 12 years, on average, we've seen a tax rate increase of 4% here in Lincoln. And again, that is the piece that we are responsible for as the local area municipality. There has been a strong reliance on our reserves. Growth and development during that same time frame has been low, and the budget increases have really gone towards maintaining the current operating needs, very much a maintenance budget. We've had limited accommodation for growth and economic development. However, this term of council has demonstrated through last year's increase of 5.3% the need for investment and the focus on economic development and growth. This year, the budget proposed is a continued investment in services, and I have highlighted in there the special infrastructure levy, which we will be talking about as we move forward with the presentation. So this is a slide that you've seen before, the guiding principles before council. These are the priorities that this term of council has adopted. As well, we are looking and continue to look at what are our regulatory and legislative requirements, the service delivery levels that have really been described by council and set forth and that SMT is executing. A desire, as I know I've heard and I've communicated, to really invest in the basics, and that really is service delivery. Mitigating some of the inflationary and utility costs that we're seeing. I think if we read the local news and news across the province, inflation and utility costs specifically are things that every municipality and every organization is dealing with. One of the things that I know I've heard loud and clear, again, whether that be through the press, whether more specifically I hear from council, is maintaining that regard for taxpayers and looking at tackling this budget through a cost-conscious approach. We also want to make sure we're in good financial position for the future. And so you'll hear us talk a little bit about where our reserves are, what our debt projections look like and how they're coming down, as well as a few other items. So the focus of this budget, as I said before, really is on compliance. You'll see an investment in roads. Can we be doing more? Absolutely. But you'll see in terms of roads, we're looking at investing both now and in future years. We continue to be aware of our reserve health. I think some of the priorities that council has identified around beautification, parks, I think about the, developing an urban forestry program. I look about improvements that council wants to make in some of our public amenities. These are some of the focuses that you'll hear about in this budget. Continual improvements in public realm spaces, and again, some of the future planning that we need to do. We're also highlighting some of the potential staffing improvements that are very much aligned to service delivery. So there are a number of council inquiries. You've got a page or a booklet in front of you, actually, that speaks to a number of them. There's a couple that came in today that I'm going to highlight in this particular presentation because I think they're critical and they're important for council to hear about. You'll notice in your information update reports that we provided some trending and data for council around our road program and the reserves within that road program. around special capital levy considerations. I think a number of councillors had asked us about those capital levy considerations and what other municipalities are doing. I can tell you, looking at the data within the Niagara context, we're finding that half of the municipalities are showing special levy increases within the Niagara region, ranging anywhere from 0.5 up to 2. When you look outside that and you look around the Golden Horseshoe, a lot of municipalities are also investing in special levies. Some are investing larger amounts than they typically have invested, preparing for the federal infrastructure intake programs. Some are, using those investments to offset capital and to invest in roads. Some of them are using it to go towards debt as well. Tax rate affordability was another item that staff presented, and again, that is some of the data that you've heard me present historically around how fast the municipality is growing. From a tax per capita standpoint, that we are the third lowest. We provided you some human resource metrics. There were some questions around our cemetery trust funds and what's in those funds, as well as our rate stabilization balance. So since last week's presentation, and as I said, today we've had a few other requests come in. We are going to make sure that we put all these online and share them with the public as well. Roads inquiry, and I know a number of members of council and I have been talking about this today, and I think even beyond today, as shortly as the last few minutes before this meeting. So historically, we presented the roads program in two parts, and I think, I accept responsibility. We probably haven't done a good job in communicating this as clear as we can. We talk about the road rehab projects, and then we look at these major urban road projects. If we break down the major project into pieces, I think historically we presented it as one piece. We've looked at urbanization, we've looked at the subsurface works that need to be done, like water, and then we have the roads piece. This year we had Drake, and we presented Drake as one project in excess of $2 million. When you look at Drake specifically as it relates to the roads piece of it, just the asphalt piece of it, not the sidewalks, not anything else that goes to it, that is $700,000. So this year we're currently budgeting approximately $1.36 million for our annual road improvements. I know we've talked about the $1.7 million number and that target that council has set. When you add the 1.36 and the 7, we do total 2.06 million. That said, I know we are conducting a roads needs study next year, and I think we need to look at what those targets are. And if we need to make more investment, we need to come back to council and demonstrate how we're going to make that additional investment to continue to trend in the direction that I think, council has set as a priority for us. Reserve stability. This was a question, again, that a number of councillors have asked. We talked a little bit about it in these updates. It happens that today our auditors came in to introduce the new auditor at KPMG, so I had a good opportunity to have a conversation both on our debts, our debt projections, to the reserve, and council will recall a number of months ago I brought a report forward on our OSIF allocations and what those had increased to. You'll notice that coming into 2017, our OSIF allocation is $282,200. It's increasing to over $400,000 in 2018 and almost $620,000 in 2019. The result of the next 2 years receiving that additional OSIF funding, totaling $354,000, and combined with the potential, if approved, special levy of $130,000, does put us in a good, strong financial position. That'll be an additional $500,000 that we put into reserves. Now, at the end of the day, what we need to do is come back to council during the year and in subsequent years and look at what we do with those reserves each and every year. Do we want to keep them in the reserves? Do we want to reinvest in the roads program? Do we want to use it towards other infrastructure? And I think the in asking the auditors if our reserves are healthy and what our reserves should be used for. I think, their comment to me was reserves are meant to ebb and flow. They will increase, they will decrease on any given year. We need to make sure that in the long term they are sustainable and that we continue to make the necessary investments, but there is an understanding that those will go up and those will come down. Our debt projections. Well, I think this slide is complicated and has a lot of numbers in it. I do want to show council, I think, the story that it's telling. When we were before you last week, we presented up until, I think, 2020. We were looking at kind of the next few years. We were looking at it from that perspective. I think what this shows is that we do peak in 2020 and that our reserves are starting to come down over the next 10 years. I think it was Councillor Brunet at that time that asked me, does this keep me up at night? Am I worried about our debt and our debt projections? I can tell you again, this was a conversation I had with our auditors today. One of the comments, and I did quote it, and I told them that I would quote it tonight, is, as it relates to debt and what we wanted debt for, we need to look at debt from the perspective of today's user pays for today's service and tomorrow's user pays for tomorrow's service. That is definitely a quote that they said, and so I think there's things that we debt and debenture for, whether that be things like the Fleming Centre, whether that be other sorts of life cycle type items, whether that be roads. There's a number of things that a lot of municipalities look at when they look at debt. So I think what I want to highlight here is that this chart is going in the right direction. It does peak, but it is coming down. I think what we need to do is be sure that we're solid when we present to you our 10-year capital plan, that what's in that plan stays within that plan, and that we don't necessarily see additions to that plan unless there are additions that happen to be things that we haven't planned for. But my goal would be that from a long-term sustainability perspective, and we are looking at our financial sustainability, that this continues to go in this direction. So in terms of a budget overview, I've highlighted the 4.65 number, and that is really kind of our, what I'm calling our base operating budget right now. That is without additional considerations for our FTEs, the council referred items, and the special infrastructure levy. I know council had some questions last time around what is controllable and what is uncontrollable. Under the uncontrollable column, we've got 1.5%, which is our negotiated collective agreement salary adjustment. I can tell you at the time, we have one of the lowest collective agreement salary schedules. There is obviously the wage progression through our grid, which again is one of those items that we budget for and that it falls under that uncontrollable column, is where we're ending this year. This morning, driving in, I looked up something from the Bank of Canada. I looked at what the 2017 anticipated numbers are, and that is in the range of 2 to 2.3%. The cost of construction is going up. We see that with bids, tenders. I know, I've had a number of questions from councillors as it relates to that. Some put that number anywhere between 15 and 30%, likely on the higher end. And then, of course, some of the uncontrollables we have is some of the carrying costs for previously acquired debt. We're seeing, like everyone else, utility increases of $64,000 this year. I do want to highlight that those would have been considerably higher had it not been for the council-approved LED program. We're seeing significant savings in that program, but with costs going up anywhere between 15 and 20% in terms of hydro and other utilities, a lot of that's being offset with the LED program that council invested in. So what's within our control? The increase for materials in our operations. We've got money program that we currently don't have. We've got monies in there for cemetery maintenance and for beautification. Again, some of the things we heard this year that were priorities. I've got another category that's within our control, and that's professional services. So that's really the contractual obligations that we have. It's hiring people for master plans and some of the other plans that we're looking at developing within Public Works. It's for things like the transit pilot project, wayfinding signage, and so forth. So taking that 4.65 and adding a number of other items that we've got to give us that overall number. The special infrastructure levy, as we've said, is 1%. We've got FTEs at 1.96%, and those are required for operational and legislative obligations, and then others. I do want to highlight that those others, and I know they've received a lot of attention in terms of the way they were presented, they do equate to less than 1% at 0.76%. That's 0.3 for the BIA, 0.3 for Canada 150, and 0.16 for the TVTA. So you'll recall that at the last meeting we presented you this chart. And I think one of the comments was that we've just shown the percentages and what do those actually equate to in dollars. We've highlighted the dollars here. I won't take you through each of them, but when we look at the new expenditures, the pre-approved expenditures, and where the assessments are, that's how we come up with that 4.65 number. We can definitely answer any questions council may have on this, but we wanted to provide the numbers so that council not only sees the percentages, but they look at the numbers as well. So operating budget by department. General government, which is the CAO's office and council. You'll see as we get to the next slides, and I think the process we're going to take is we're going to show you the drivers, then we're going to go to the slide and you can look at the increases and what those increases are. There is a small increase within the economic development budget line, and that's where we've placed the transit pilot project. There are some of the contractual and other increases that we're looking at around the Municipal Act and the Code of Conduct development that I know we've talked about. There are the step progressions in terms of wages and some minor increases in the development training budgets as they relate to council and the CAO's office. You'll see here I've tried to highlight this in 3 different colors. I think to highlight where we were in 2016, 17, and what are some of the one-time items. There's an increase of 12% in this office in the general government kind of area. The majority of that coming really from just the progression through salaries and benefits. Again, we've made some small accommodations around revenues and some of the potential legislative developments that need to occur there. Corporate services, the budget drivers here. Again, you're seeing some very minor increases in contractual and other line items, specifically looking at legal costs, as well as a small increase in the business continuity plan budget. You'll see under business continuity, we've added a total request of an additional $10,000 to do that business continuity. And we looked at the road allowance conversation we had on Monday. We've got a number of road allowances coming in. I'm going to suggest that between this year and in 2016 and 17, we've at least got 10 coming in. We have made some very, very modest projections. I know Chair Foster highlighted at that time anything above and beyond that should go into a special capital, I think, infrastructure account, and that we come back at that time to council and identify what are some of the opportunities to use those monies for. And that we provide opportunities for council and options for council to look at either reinvesting in roads, reinvesting in other capital infrastructure projects. So our goal is that above and beyond what we've budgeted here for, that we'll be coming back with those monies and with a report on that. Finance and admin. The majority of the drivers within finance and admin, you'll recall that we did a phased approach to the Microsoft Office rollout and upgrade integration. We are proceeding with phase 2 of that. We are looking at updating our website content management system, again, to make our website a little bit more user-friendly. We've got a new design coming. This is really phase 2 of that, and introducing some online payment portals. You see a decrease here in the finance and admin budget, and that is really based on the taxation amounts. If we take you through each of the line items on treasury and admin, again, you're seeing some minor increases within that particular department. We can, I'll just highlight again what some of those additional increases are as a result of. Again, I did highlight for council that we were having some financial system online upgrades, and that is in the amount of $4,400. Again, we were looking at some of the help desk software in the amount of $3,500. And so that, coupled with some of the other items around IT and website content management systems, really make up the bulk of that increase. Fire and emergency services. We've got some monies set aside for safety equipment around boots. I know we've talked about some opportunities in terms of looking at a phased approach to that, but that makes up some of the increase within the fire and emergency services budget line. We're doing some dispatch system upgrades. There's a small increase in the public education materials within the fire and emergency services budget. and an increase in the number of volunteers is happening, which is a major driver under the salaries line. A lot of this is needed to meet our response standards and to make sure that we've got coverage as it relates to our volunteer service, and so we are hiring more volunteers. Again, you're seeing a total request in 2017 for the fire, rescue, and emergency services in the amount of 3%, totaling $43,119. Public Works and the budget drivers. There's an increase again in contractual services for some of the major projects and plans. A number of these you've heard us talk about before. We're looking at a roads needs study early in 2017. We're continuing and we'll be moving forward with the Transportation Master Plan, the GO Mobility and Hub Study Works, a salt management plan, a guardrail replacement program. We're working with CN on a level crossing study. Traffic calming is something that Council's identified as a priority in 2016 and moving forward. We've heard about the needs for wayfinding signage. There are some other small increases in service delivery levels, road maintenance, repair-related activities, some of the bridge and culvert maintenance and repair works. And again, being our largest department, we see a progression of staff through the band level and see increases in our salaries line there. $100,000 increase in the roadways, snow and sand budget line. Looking at the works we're doing around our parking and our parking lots and the rehabilitation, $107,000, and around storm sewer systems, $57,000. We've got some other items in there, and that is some of the works around our landfill site assessment in Jordan. Sport, recreation, and culture. Here you've heard me talk about this a number of times, I think, an increase in other expenses for park amenities. So Council's talked about urban forestry, you've talked about, and you've heard me say on a number of occasions, we've got some parks that don't have trees. We need to invest in trees, create an urban forestry program. We need garbage cans, benches. We've got the Emerald Ash Borer program that we continue with. From a facility standpoint, we've deferred some items on the capital budget. But we are looking at doing some front entrance and arena gate work. There's some minor HVAC improvements and just general maintenance. There are some major project plans that we're moving forward with. Park developments around Serena Drive and Prokich. We're looking at extra plant materials in a number of our parks and public realm spaces. We're developing a parks master plan, a cemetery master plan, and updating the 2002 Trails Master Plan. There's also some of the minor operational works that we need to be undertaken as part of the broader so around facilities, you're seeing some increases within the facilities budget to the amount of $84,598. You're seeing our cemeteries go up to by $48,454. The Lincoln Center, we received a grant, so you're seeing some decreases there to the amount of almost $3,000. Our parks and facilities, you're seeing an increase here you're seeing an increase here of $60,000, $889. You're seeing our recreational programming increases in the amount of $7,967. Heritage, we're showing a very small increase of $1,000 within the heritage line. And museum, we're actually looking to probably have some savings in that particular area, just in terms of movement, where we're moving to, and some of the lower operational costs that we're experiencing at the current site, and because we're already paying some of the operating costs in the current, or in the what was the old library, we'll see a decrease in that particular area. So a total summary, we're seeing an increase in sport, recreation, and culture of approximately 5%. Planning and development. You've seen us present these data points at the last meeting around just the increase in planning applications, the potential residential units, and so forth, so I won't spend time there. The bylaw updates is a cost that we're factoring in for 2017. I can definitely tell you we're ramping up on bylaw. We're seeing that almost every day in terms of new issues or new items that are coming in. There's also major projects and plans impacting the budget that are coming forward. No surprise to anyone around the Prudhomes and the Prudhomes secondary plan, the community improvement plan development that we're doing around Prudhomes, industrial and agricultural sectors. Again, there's some work here with the Go Mobility and Hub study and the gateway designs that need to be undertaken. Due to revenue, we're definitely seeing a decrease within the Planning and Development Department of 18%. As I think we've said to you, and I think a number of councillors have asked, when we look at planning and development and that department moving forward, we're likely going to be coming to you over the next number of months, and I'll suggest the next number of years, updating you on what are some of the needs there. We're likely looking at some temporary needs within that particular department as we up resource or as we need to entertain contractual resources to address some of the additional works around Prudhomes. But at this point in time, planning and development is showing a decrease due to the existing revenues. Library, Jill is here. She can definitely talk to the library in more detail should council have questions. You'll recall that Chair Krault and CEO Nicholson presented the library budget. The 2017 request is $71,318. 50,000 or almost 51,000 of that is for the part-time additional staffing that's required. Jill can talk to what was originally budgeted for a potential grant, and so you're seeing that 29,495 be something that I think the library initially thought would be something that they could cover off through a grant. That has been put on hold, and so the needs of the library are in that 8% number, and they're 71,318. So we've got before and in front of all of you FTE business cases, and so this will be the next thing we take you through, followed by the various scenarios. I do want to highlight for council that SMT has spent, going back probably about 2 months now, a number of meetings talking about what are some of the critical needs across the not only the organization, but how do we meet some of the council priorities that are set in some of our legislative requirements. Our initial efforts, I think as you would expect from us, are always to look at, can we find it within the existing budget? Can we repurpose positions? Do we have positions in the organization that can be We did prepare business cases, and again, each member of SMT is here. They can speak to them in more depth. I'll give you an overview of them, and then we can take any questions that you may have once we're finished the presentation. The business cases include an outline of the core functions, the role in achieving the outcomes and how they relate to council's priorities. These are some of the things that you wanted us to address in bringing any We looked at what and how other municipalities present business cases, and that's why we brought them forward this way. Are there external funding sources that potentially could offset some of the cost of these FTEs? And what role do they play in revenue generation? I've heard loud and clear from council the need to not only budget for revenues from a one-time perspective, but how do we continue to meet our revenue projections and look at revenues on a year-by-year basis? You've got a handout, again, that provides the details of the business cases. We explored needs across all departments. I can tell you anytime you get around a room, I was at the chalkboard, or the, not the chalkboard, but I was at the, at the whiteboard there. I had my marker. I think I lost a shirt through this. Ended up with marker all over it. That's not from SMT throwing it at me, but, me talking a lot with my hands. We spoke about, and you'll recall that I've shared with you, we looked at all the departments. We spoke about finance and admin and the need to look at procurement. We have deferred anything on that discussion. Of work, is there a cost sharing element there? Is that a temporary element? So didn't want to bring that forward. We look at upstaffing and planning to align to Prudhomes, but again, I think we need to come back with you when we have a full scope of where we're at with Prudhomes. What are the timelines in that? And again, those would be temporary resources, so we're not proposing anything there. There are two streams of business cases that you have before you. I will try to go quickly through the first one, and that is the no levy impact one. This is the Public Works Compliance Officer. You've heard about this before. You've got in front of you not only a summary of the business case, but you've also got in front of you Director Graham's previous report. So on this one, we're seeking approval following the already presented business case. Again, I'll echo for anyone listening, anyone writing about it. This is one that has zero levy impact. This is funded through our rate budget, and these are to match our, to address some of the compliance around our drinking water quality management system, which is now, even more than it was, heavily regulated, and there are significant enhanced legislative responsibilities. We have a growth impact on our drinking water system, and so this role will entertain some of those works. There's a huge legislative and health safety requirement piece to it around the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Ontario Water Resources Act. As I highlighted, this is 100% funded through the water and wastewater rates and has no levy impact. So there are four positions that we're presenting that have a 1.96% increase or a $256,000 and $256,094 impact. I spoke to you around SRC management. We've talked about economic development. The third is the legislative coordinator, and the fourth is the emergency management and regulatory coordinator. So I'm going to take you through each of them now. The sports, recreation, and culture, I've tried to break this potential business case for you into two things. You'll recall when I spoke to you both publicly and in camera on some human resource matters that there's a few positions I think we're looking at within SRC. What we're coming forward and asking for funding for is really one position. It is a senior management level position within that particular department that is really designed to look at how we better address some of the needs and delineate between some of the operational needs, which are really our parks and facilities, and the more community-focused piece around recreation, culture, and what we're, I think, calling community development or community outreach. There is a second position around project management, and I know I've spoken to council about the need to look at project management from an enterprise perspective. So what we're asking for is on this particular element, and I think I've heard from a number of members of council, there is a PM role that's required, and I think what we'd like to do is look at coming back to you, doing a slight reorganization, rolling that out and announcing that more broadly in the organization, and looking at what are the needs and examining both the job levels. Is there an ability to repurpose? Is there an ability to look at funds within the current complement there? I can highlight to you, and I think you've heard me talk about the senior management level role and how that links to the council priorities and work plan, and what the project manager role is and what some of the responsibilities will be there. In terms of revenue generation, for both of those roles, but I'll highlight specifically on the senior management role. This role, will be responsible for overseeing areas that generate revenue for the town. We need to look at, and I think we've identified what some of them are, but newer innovative revenue streams, the sustainability around those revenue streams, along with, the long-term plan for how we achieve that. I do want to highlight, I think publicly for everyone, and I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone either listening or reading whatever's reported. SRC is responsible for a number of projects over this term of council. We've got a number of fire station builds. We've got a museum, not to mention a significant number of parks, both small and large, that need to be developed. The next one is economic development and an economic development officer. I think council will recall you've had conversations in the past. I did a quick search of some of the articles that were written about economic development dating back to 2012. You recall at the last meeting we spoke about developing a new economic development committee that will be chaired by Councillor McPherson and the vice chair being Councillor Pachariva. We talked about looking at economic development, I think a little bit more holistically across the organization. Currently, economic development is really handled, I'm going to suggest, by SMT. I definitely take a lead role in that. I'm probably the first conduit when people want information or want to set up shop here or have interests. And then I look to likely, in most cases, Kathleen, followed by Dave in terms of what Public Works can offer and do from that perspective. Council has a priority within their council priorities and their work plan around economic development. So the role here, I mean, I've highlighted it here in terms of the critical factors to function for this service area. There is some both local, regional, and national markets that we need to look at and present Lincoln's value proposition over those around us. It really is, that one stop when people come in and they look to us as, okay, can we have some information on this property or that property? What's for sale? I can tell you right now, I think we're limping along in terms of when people come, and I'll suggest that there is an interest that's coming to Lincoln. There's definitely an interest. I get, I'm going to say on average, 2 to 3 calls a week of those people looking either for vacant properties. I was dealing with a recent business interest who bought a piece of property here and who within the last month has been called 4 times, and folks have offered to buy that off them. There's definitely a huge interest in our community. I think that's a good thing. When we look at our tax base, often looking at both commercial and industrial is where we grow that tax base in terms of the taxes that are paid. There's definitely a residential reliance. I think what we need to do is, again, part of it is that stakeholder partner, relationship building that needs to occur. I highlighted there under revenue generation that revenue generation is really one of those things that's hard to quantify for this particular position. If we're successful in attracting new business, new investment in this community, then the position does pay for itself. But economic development is a focus for this council. It's been a focus for this council. I know right now, like I said, we have been doing it, and we've been doing it, I think, by off the corner of our desks. It does need to be a priority, and so we're bringing this forward in terms of what we need to do around economic development. The third levy impacted position is a legislative coordinator. We've heard from council the desire to have consistent legislative support for all our standing committees. There's a need to provide specialized support for those meetings. There needs to be legislative support at each and every one of those meetings. There's documentation that we're currently, I think, preparing, but that we can be definitely doing more of and doing better of. There's the notification, again, that I think we're doing, but that we can continue to do more of if we were resourced appropriately. We're looking at tracking and reporting a lot of the outstanding action items that need to occur in that particular area. And we look at the Municipal Act, we look at the changes coming within the Municipal Act. There are a number of roles and responsibilities that we're going to have to take on around investigating and assisting with closed and special session meetings, code of conduct investigations. We're going to have to look at integrity, commissioner investigations. There's a lot of things that either we can outsource and we can do it almost on a per diem basis, or you could look at a resource. We've taken the approach at looking at the resource because on top of those per diem type things that we could look at, the need to look at legislative coordinators. Again, we reached out to some of our comparators. We reached out to Niagara Region. We looked at their staff complement and look at the number of meetings that each of the legislative staff are taking on in those particular municipalities, averaging in the 2 to 3 range. With this resource, we'll definitely be in that same range. We have new meetings coming on. Will and I were just going over the new calendar for next year as it relates to the addition of meetings and the more regular nature of our committee of the whole. So every month we'll be adding an additional meeting. And what is some of the work required, I think, to move those forward and to add a level of consistency and professionalism that I think council wants around these meetings. That is by no way indicative of, I think, the staff we have. Right now we have administrative staff, I think in a lot of ways playing the role of clerk and minute taker at those meetings. And so we're bringing this forward. The fourth position that is part of that FTE business case proposal is around emergency management and regulatory affairs, and that is an emergency management and regulatory coordinator. I can tell you that This is a role a lot of municipalities are focusing on, and that isn't just because there's a legislative element to it. I think anytime you find yourself in an emergency, and there are a number of outreach and educational materials that need to go forward with that. There are some record keeping and things that we need to make sure we are in compliance with from the fire marshal's perspective. And again, currently we are looking at our fire service program. We're looking at better outreach. We're looking at better customer service. I can highlight, I know that council has invested in the fire service in past years, and I think that doesn't go unnoticed both by the community, and I can tell you by me as your CAO and the chief and deputy chief that are here today. I'm not going to take you through in-depth items here around the Civil Protection Act and Regulation 38-0-04 in terms of what those are. Deputy Blake is here. He can definitely take you through those should you have any questions around the maintenance of an emergency management program and so forth. There are some funding sources here, and I think we're looking at not only are there some of the cost insurance recovery things that we spoke to around Fire Marquee, but I think there's some other elements that we can look at doing in terms of reach out, in terms of some of the works that our fire prevention staff are doing. So moving forward, I'm going to take you through some tax levy scenarios. Council asked us to come back with tax levy scenarios. Once we're done this, we'll move to kind of questions. Council can get a little bit more in depth in terms of any questions you may have for me or any of the department heads. So again, we looked at the tax levy scenarios, and let me highlight here that the approach we took here, we tried to listen to what council said. None of this is set in stone. I think the one thing that was clear when we looked at the tax levy scenario was that it needed to come down. I think that's not a surprise. We presented you a budget in terms of that original draft scenario that was one of those all-in budgets. By no means did we think it was going to stay there. You'll see there the elements that make up that budget that we sharpened our pencils a bit here. We looked at exactly what was the projections that were coming in, and that is 8.38. I think the paper quote said at 8.62, but it was definitely in the mid to high eights when we came to you last week. So when we looked at that original draft scenario, and I'm going to try to do this with each of them, we gave you what is the rate the municipality is responsible for and what is the blended rate. That original 8.38 comes in at a 3.16 blended rate. Understanding that we're responsible for a third, but at the end of the day, the taxpayer looks at the piece at the bottom there. So the principles and considerations for new scenarios. I think it was fairly clear that from a Canada 150 perspective, it could be premature for us to look for any additional monies. And what we should be doing is coming to you if and when that money is needed, and if and when we either are successful or not successful in our grants. We looked at tweaks to operations in order to find some savings or defer some items. I told you we looked at phasing boot purchases, for example, within fire. We looked at phasing and cutting some of our economic development line items and seeing if we could do some things differently. We also just looked at some of our IT needs and deferring some of that training, some other items that I think we could look at and look at if there was an ability to defer. We also looked at options to fund various projects differently. So scenario one, you'll see here we've, and again, we looked at, I think some of the comments we heard around should we wait and fund things like the Tourism Association once they're finished their strategic plan? Should we look at finding different ways to fund things? Again, these, we can take a number of scenarios here and figure out how do we dwindle down that particular number. And again, I'll highlight this is one scenario. There are 3 scenarios that we've laid out for you. I can tell you that every $13,000 equates to 0.01% of an impact, and so there's areas where we can cut, absolutely, but just letting council know, in terms of we definitely sharpened our pencils here and looked at where we could find savings. So you'll see here We've taken a scenario at 7.92 that saw us lower the TVTA support, lower the BIA support at this point in time, lowered the BIA support and eliminated Canada 150, and that brought us up to 7.87, or a blended rate of 3. And we took scenario 3, which saw us cut monies in terms of the levy requirement from a staff perspective and look at where we could cut there. It looked at us keeping both the human capital element and the special infrastructure piece, which I think from a staff perspective we're advising you are important. We removed Canada 150, we removed the TVTA, and we lowered the BIA support to come in at 7.64. When we look at the blended rate around that, it is 2.93. I can tell you in terms of where we were and where we are now, we're at about a 1.5% lower. That's over $160,000 that we found since last week in terms of where we're sitting at this particular budget. So to give you a recap, I've started with taxpayer affordability. I know I received some emails from the community. I received both good and folks that had questions for me. Folks that had questions no different than I think members of council around where is the tax increase going? What does that mean? Are we investing in this particular area? There were folks that asked me about prudums and a number of other items. So the regard for taxpayer affordability, I think, was paramount. When we look at that last scenario around 7.64, I know we presented you that, it's 112 and change, per year. It's 33 cents per day, and we gave you that calculation. $1 a year and under 30 cents a day, less and $2 a week. We've looked at the deferral of items until plans are in place for long-term sustainability. I've highlighted the Tourism Association there. That is not to say that I think from a staff perspective we're not supportive of these particular items, but that is, we need to make sure, and I think I heard loud and clear from council, we need to have plans and we need to make sure that things are sustainable before we're giving money. I think we need to be reporting back and encouraging the reporting back for these special funding for organizations. We need to be investing today for tomorrow. And I know that sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but it really is looking at the sustainability of our reserve. Invest in both basic, soft, and hard infrastructure. That's really where the investment is here. I said to you, we need to get back to the basics. I think I've been quoting saying that. To me, the basics really are those infrastructure investments. There are parks. The potholes. We've got some legislative obligations we need to look at. There are some, rising costs for basic services and utilities that, unfortunately, like every organization, we're needing to either absorb and work with. I do want to highlight that on December 13th, the water rate presentation is happening. We're also having the consultants come in at that particular meeting, and we'll be looking at that point in time for final approval of the budget. So thank you, and questions.
We're not going to ask any questions. We're going to start questions at 8 o'clock. We're going to take a brief break.
Johnson.
Okay. Are you doing math? Yeah.